My name's Chris Pratt. I'm the design engineer here at Railblazer. I grew up in Whangaparoa around here. I went to school on the coast. Went off to university when I finished up at high school and did a mechatronics engineering degree. And when I finished there, I started at Railblazer, ended up in the role that I'm in now. While I was studying, I did a little bit of work here in my holidays and stuff, and that's when the kind of, at the end of that, the role kind of emerged. We had a project, that sort of a development project that came up, and it sort of aligned with my skills that I'd gained at uni. Yeah, that's sort of, I've been here since then. It's really critical, I think. You'd almost say it's a design-driven company. The CEO who runs it, that's his big passion, is developing new products, and it's part of something that's kept us ahead of our competition, I think, is our ability to keep the product range agile and always developing with new stuff coming out, keeping ahead of people who are counterfeiting or trying to do what we are, by just keeping those new ideas flowing. And keeping an efficient design process allows us to, because we're quite a small company, allows us to stay ahead of the competition in a lot of ways. Some of the bigger companies around the world, development cycles can sort of get bogged down in procedure and paperwork and stuff. And while we try and keep a bit of that stuff going on here, so you don't get lost or make mistakes, our ability to work across the office and develop stuff quickly has definitely been an advantage. I suppose you'd think of it sort of like an attention span, in that when you're constantly being agile and reactive, you can lose sight of the bigger picture sometimes. So some projects that we probably had on our roadmap, say 2 years ago, that have been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back by these little things that come along, it'd probably be really good to have some of those finished up by now that have been delayed. So again, yeah, it's sort of, that's all about managing the long-term goals, which is something we work on. One of the biggest challenges as a designer going forward is growing the company and putting the right procedures in place to kind of ensure that we grow efficiently and effectively, without sort of tripping over little things. For example, adding a few people into the office down there, responsibilities that were kept in the head of 2 or 3 people are now spread across the office. There's new people. We've had to add procedures and paperwork to make sure that stuff doesn't get missed, which can feel inefficient, because in the past you'd be able to just assume someone will get that done. Now you've got to sit down and write it all down, but at the end of the day it's important to do that stuff or you'll keep making the same mistakes. Yeah, that's obviously it's obviously a concern that could limit innovation and things like that, but I think that's a part of making sure you grow the company effectively, because at the end of the day growth is what every business is pushing towards, and it's just making sure you can do that in the most effective way possible without, like you say, limiting your advantages. So a project sort of usually takes off from an idea that's come down the pipeline from our salespeople around the world, or someone's had an idea, and that's brought to me, usually shouted across the room, or maybe if I'm lucky it's come in an email or something like that. And that's where we have a design meeting we try to have at least every 2 weeks, and that's where we sit with the boss and the other people involved in design, and we basically talk through our product roadmap. So these new ideas get lodged against up against all the other projects that we have rolling, because there's always a few at any given time, and then pretty well, once the priority's established and it fits into my time frame, I'll sit down and work on some concepts, and that usually begins sketching something out on a piece of paper, go through a few rough ideas of how it could go together, and then I'll get into my computer onto CAD and model it up in there. So with a concept, I'll usually try, before we go too far, you'll want to develop 1, 2, maybe even 3 concepts to a point that you could actually put it together. And then, so yeah, we make it, model it all up in the computer, and that's when we'll probably catch up again, have a design meeting, get everybody's input, and you sort of, that's when you're looking at, is this going to be strong enough here? Is this going to complete the task that it needs to? And then we'll probably order some 3D prints. So that lets us get a physical look at the design and the product. We're lucky we don't have a 3D printer ourselves because they're quite an expensive investment, obviously. The best way for us is we use a company in Australia that has all of the best machines, and they have some really competitive rates. We get to pick and choose from the different processes for 3D printing and get the best prototype that we can, and within a year's expenditure we're still really far off justifying one of those printers ourselves. So yeah, then we get the 3D prints in, we'll take a look at the design in our hands, sort of test it out as much as you can. A lot of the 3D prints now are strong enough that you can actually do some pretty good robustness testing. And then, yep, that's your model. So you kind of work out, is this what we're going to be able to go with? Back to the computer, refine anything that we weren't happy with, and at that point you've usually sort of narrowed down which of the 3 concepts, 2 or 3 concepts that you've got is going to be the way you go. And then assuming it's all go, it's working well, we've kind of probably at this point started to work back from a price, because at the end of the day the products we're developing, we can make the coolest product in the world, but if it's going to be too expensive, we're not going to sell it. So we tend to try and work from a market point, a price, and work our way back from there. And that lets us kind of figure out what we can do within that. And if you work out that all of the parts that you're aiming towards are going to be too expensive, it's not going to work. So you've got to go back and work on a new concept. So assuming that everything's all go, our concept then, our models then go to our injection molding company down in Napier. So that's where we're going to turn it from an idea into something that we can mass produce. Basically we're going to have to design a tool from there. So that's where our plastic the prototype, we have to work out if you can put it into an injection molding tool. So that's stuff we try and keep in mind all the way along, as there's a few design limitations around the process, and then we kind of tidy things up from there. Get a tool designed, and that's when you start getting your part prices and confirm whether we're still within that piece of the market. And then I pretty well hand things off at that point down to Napier until it all comes back in once we've made a tool. So once the tool gets made, we get some off-tool samples. They come up here, we check those out, assuming everything's gone well, the things fit together. We set things up with production down there, and we go through a pre-production process of setting up the bench area down there, get some instructions ready for the staff, and then we're pretty well away. It's in and amongst all of that, where there's obviously packaging's designed, we've got to do advertising material for the product. When you start talking about it, you actually realise how much goes on. I think it's project management. The biggest challenge is probably project management. It's just juggling the different tasks, because like I say, where those ideas come from, we try to keep it pretty market driven, and the problem with that is the market's always asking for new things. So we're this little office down here in Silverdale in New Zealand, and we're selling stuff into America, into the UK, all over the world, and all of those unique markets are going to have their own desires and needs. So I guess it's like we've got to sit here, we have a list of priorities that we're developing to get into our range, and it's just making sure you're always working on the right one and not pushing the other stuff back that you should have maybe been working on instead. And also for myself personally, within that, what the company wants is actually how I'm applying myself to those roles the most efficiently, because I'm working on these designs, I'm working on a lot of production stuff as well. So out there when we have problems, I'm designing jigs and things like that to help out on the production lines to keep things efficient, and it's just keeping everybody happy, I think, is the hard part. So I guess, time management. Okay, so I guess when I'm designing a product, there's 2 things that you're juggling. It's the manufacturability, so how easy it's going to be to make, and then that links to how cost effective it'll be to make, and then there's the ultimate goal of the best possible product for the user. So you're kind of the whole time compromising between, because a lot of the time the best case scenario is going to be the hardest to make. And like the user might want a Gucci soft rubber handle, but for us that adds a whole lot of cost to it. So it's trying to, I guess what you're juggling is getting the best possible thing that you can make for the right price. Coupled with that, I suppose another thing that we try to keep in mind is waste. We want to be as environmentally conscious as we can. So with a lot of our packaging design and stuff like that, we've tried to move away from plastic and things like that, and try and get stuff onto paper cards and things. So again, we're designing around sort of packing efficiency, stuff that you can nest together and get more into a box. That's going to cost less when it goes onto a ship around the world. Yeah, engaging with the sales side is something that's a personal interest of mine, and I've really enjoyed that about working here, is kind of hearing and being involved with some of that stuff. When I first started here, I did a bit of work with dispatch and stuff, just booking shipments and things, so you get to see the whole pipeline within the company. Sales-wise, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to go up to Amsterdam to a trade show there and actually stand on the stand and help sell our stuff basically to the world. So it's definitely an important part, I think, as a designer to try and keep linked with the people who are buying your stuff and the people who are selling your stuff as well. Because at the end of the day, they're facing the customers, and if the customers aren't interested in what you're designing, then there's no point in designing it. So, and yeah, hearing feedback. I also handle warranties and sort of any quality issues we have with the products. So that lets me keep an eye on anything that's going wrong down the pipeline in the life cycle of the products, and keep that in mind for future designs to try and not make the same mistakes, I guess, is what you're trying to do.